So welcome everyone. Talking today about image resolution and pixels and math and how all of that affects the display of your photos, mainly when we're printing. But in photography, there's always this balance between going out and making pictures and enjoying floating around on the pond. And then we get to the computer and the technical chase is on. And so I want to try to help us smooth that out a little bit so we're all flying together, working together smooth. But you never know. Somebody gets mad once in a while and it takes a nosedive and we're battling. We're trying to figure out image size, resolution, and what seems like that constant battle to keep things in out of disarray, keep it clear. So we hopefully we'll clear that up today. So I want to get started with the basic building blocks of digital images, and that is pixels. So all digital images are made up of a grid of thousands of pixel elements, or pixels, and a pixel can only be one color, but it can vary. That color can vary. And how many colors each pixel can display can also vary, and that's called bit depth. So it could be only two, black and white, or it could be millions, and so you can get lots more tones and more gradual color blending. So if you blow up a picture real large like this one, you'll see that in like Photoshop or a photo editing program, you'll see those single blocks of color, and it looks like a grid because it is a grid. So each one of these is a pixel. So the real question is, how many pixels do you need? Well, that comes down to several factors, and we're talking about resolution. And when we're talking about resolution, a lot of people are talking about different things. So it's basically three things that people are talking about as resolution as the same thing, but they're not at all. So it's pixel dimensions, file size, or printed image resolution, okay? So let's just start with pixel dimensions. And that's pretty simple. It's how many pixels are in the grid. For instance, 3,000 pixels wide in your photo and 2,000 pixels high. That's your pixel dimensions. And the reality is, in all of this confusing crap, pixel dimensions are all you really need to know. Other things really don't matter. So we're going to spend almost an hour telling you why all of that doesn't matter and why pixel dimensions are what you really need to know. A lot of people get confused with printed resolution and misunderstanding file size and convolute it all together. So we're going to clear it up. So let's just start with file size. And so file size is the digital size of an image file. Okay, that's it. It's a file size is the actual how big that is. And that is measured in kilobytes, K, megabytes, MB, or gigabytes, GB. So if we have our 3,000 pixel wide by 2,000 pixel high image, 3,000 by 2,000 equals 6 million K, or 600 megabytes, or 6 gigabytes. So this is a raw file, and the file format also affects file size. So when somebody says, I need a file size that's 6 gigabytes, doesn't mean a thing. Does not mean a thing, because there are other factors in file size. It could be file types. So a JPEG 6 gigabyte file is way different than a PNG or a TIFF or a Photoshop or whatever you have type of file size. File size is also affected by the color bit depth, the number of layers. So if you're using a Photoshop file and you have several layers, that'll affect the file size. And if you're using multiple channels in your file, we're not talking about layers or channels today. But when we have that 6 gigabyte file size, we still don't know the print resolution. Some people think that 6 gigabyte, that the file size is the resolution, but it's not. So the only thing that the file size tells you is how much room that file is going to take up on your hard drive. That's it. That's it. So then there is print resolution, and print resolution is the fineness of details measured in pixels per inch, or PPI. So the more PPI you have, the higher the resolution of the file. And so generally, an image with higher resolution will produce a better image quality when you print it. We're talking about when you're printing it, okay? So this is print resolution. So if you have our 3000 by 2000 pixel dimensions and it's at 100 PPI, that is much lower quality than if that same file was at 300 PPI and you had the same number of pixels. Now we're gonna really get you confused and straighten you all out on all of this, but what it really comes down to is who cares? You know, file size and pixels per inch sound like a lot of math. It is. You don't have to do the math a whole lot. The computer will do it for you, especially Photoshop and your printer. But the machine printing your photo cares, but your computer screen doesn't. So interestingly, your printer cares about pixel dimensions and PPI. Your computer screen cares only about PPI. I'm lying. That's wrong. Your computer screen cares only about pixel dimension. Well, I got that wrong. Okay, made the slide wrong. So why your screen doesn't care about PPI? Here's why. So say you have two screens, like I do. I have an iMac that's 5760. The screen resolution 5760 by 3600. That's the resolution of the screen. That's the way they build it. So there's 5760 pixels wide on my screen, 3600 pixels deep. My iMac, oh, that's my iMac. My laptop is 2880 by 1800. So that's how many pixels the screen will show. Okay. Doesn't matter how big the screen is. If it was a 5-inch screen, they'd be packed in really tight. If it's a 27-inch screen, it's going to be bigger, right? So if I have a file that is 2880, it is going to fill up the screen on the laptop. Doesn't matter what the resolution is, it cares about the file size. So at 2880, that picture is going to fill up my laptop screen. But my iMac screen, it's only going to take a portion of it. Okay. So my iMac screen is 27 inches wide. My laptop screen is 15 inches wide physically. If I took a tape measure to it and measured it, doesn't matter. It's the resolution of the screen, not the size, not the width, not the diagonal measurement, which is how they really measure them. It's the resolution, the screen resolution. So when I output a photo from my blog, I know that on my blog, the widest picture I can fit in my blog area is 910 pixels. So resolution doesn't matter. It's the number of pixels that matter. So when I output a picture from Lightroom or Photoshop to go to for my blog that I'm going to upload, I make it 910 pixels wide. Resolution doesn't matter. It's going to be the same file size, and I'll prove that to you here in a minute. But a printer needs to know how many pixels there are per inch and the pixel dimensions. Kinda. Kinda. So the printer will do the math, but you can do it if you want to. So when you change, so this is a screenshot off of Photoshop. So you notice that my image dimensions are 5792 pixels by 8,065. This is a vertical picture, okay? So when I'm at 300 DPI, or pixels per inch, 300 pixels per inch, or I'm at 72.8 pixels per inch, my image dimension is the same, and my image size is the same. Now, I haven't resampled, so this is as long as I don't resample. We'll talk about resampling in a minute. But if I change the resolution on either of those, my image size does not change. Now, the print size might, but the image size does not change when I change resolution, as long as I'm not resampling, okay? Why is that important? Because say I had a picture that's 4,500 pixels wide by 3,000 pixels deep. And I picked that number because it's easy to do math with. So if I want to make a 15-inch, so if I want to make a print at 300 pixels per inch, that's going to be a 15-inch by 10-inch picture. Divide 4,500 by 300, you get 15. Divide 3,000 by 300, you get 10. If I want it to be a 200 pixel per inch print, it's going to come out at 22 inches to 22 and a half inches by 15 inches. Again, divide 4,500 by 200, you get 22.5. Divide 3,000 by 200, you get 15. If it's at 100 pixels per inch, I now have a 45-inch print by 30-inch print. Again, divide 4,500 by 100 and you get 45. 3,000 by 100, you get 30. Okay. So the quality may change. It might not as your PPI changes, but your file size has not changed at all, right? You still have that 4,500 by 3,000. I didn't do the math on that. Anybody can do that fast. 13.5. So it's a 13.5 gigabyte file. Is that right? 1.3, 13.5. So the file size doesn't change. You're just reorganizing the pixels. And so you can move pixels, you know, in and out all you want. And so I pulled this off of MPix Pro, which is one of the top print labs in the country. That's a screenshot showing the file size recommendations. And so on the left is the print size, so 11 by 14 on top. Then they have the optimum pixel dimensions and the minimum pixel dimensions. They're printing everything at 250 PPI. This is their optimum. So if you want to do some easier math, go down to the 30 by 30 inch. So at 250 PPI, you need to have a 7,500 by 7,500 file. That's your pixel size. But you'll notice in the right column, they say the minimum they can do is 3,000 by 3,000 for that 30-inch by 30-inch print. That means they're getting away with printing at 100 pixels per inch, which everybody will tell you you can't do that. But a hell of a lot of labs do. So you can see here that the optimum size is dependent at when you're printing on the pixel dimensions. So optimum versus minimum. It's all based on pixel dimensions. Okay. So
okay, can I ask a question real quick?
Sure.
Okay, the 11 by 14, it says optimum minimum. If I take the 11 by 14, I'm going down to the 30 by 30 because you said 75 by 75. If I take that, what I'm saying is that if I take the same picture, I can, at 11 by 14, it would look better than the 30 by 40 because the pixels would be smaller?
No, the size of the pixel is the same. It's how many there are packed into a certain area. So if you had if you had 7,500 pixels wide and you're printing the 11 by 14, it's just going to resample them down, and everything's going to be great. If you try to take that 27 by 50 and enlarge it to 30 by 30, you're gonna have some problems because you're resampling and you're adding pixels from who knows where.
But in that optimum column, everything is at a 250 pixel per inch. So wouldn't the clarity of the image be equal, just accommodated for the size of the print being made?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay. So what's key here, though, is the pixel dimensions. How many pixels there are. Okay. So,
Lauren, a quick question. If you are expanding with lower pixels to a size that they wouldn't recommend, are they not actually just producing larger dimensions for the pixel?
we're getting into that next. So no, not larger dimensions for the pixel. They're adding pixels. So they're just creating more pixels. And how do they do that? They do that with what's called resampling, which throws a whole nother factor into the whole ball game, right? So resampling. So this is a original size coming right out of the camera. So with my camera, it's the pixel dimensions are 5792 by 8065 for a vertical photo. Okay. So if I'm at 240 resolution and printing that baby, it'll make a 24.133 inch print at 240 pixels per inch. Okay. Now, if I'm resampling, and in Photoshop, I check the resample box to do this, you'll see that you can tell the file to have more or less pixels. More can make the picture bad, but less never does. So you can see how my pixel dimensions have changed. So I'm still making a 24-inch print on the left at 300 pixels per inch. Now my pixel dimensions have jumped up to 7239 by 10,080. Whereas on the right in my original size, my pixel dimensions were 572 by 5792 by 8065. Okay. So by resampling, I have added pixels. I have physically added pixels to the image. That can be bad. It can be okay. When it's bad is when you add too many and you have no idea what's going to happen. So what happens when it's resampled is, if there was a blue pixel and a yellow pixel, it's probably going to think, well, the one in between ought to be green. So it will add a green pixel in between them if it needs to add only one pixel to a row. When you need to add a ton of pixels like this is doing, it's going through and just trying to figure out, I wonder what color that should be. Let's try this color. Sometimes it works great, sometimes it sucks. So you generally, you don't want to upsample. Generally, you can get away with it a lot more than you think, though. So let's look again. So here's the same photo on top. My original size was 5792 by 8065. When I resampled it to 300, when I changed my resolution to 300 DPI, I get a file size, or my dimensions now, 7239 by 10,080, right? So
it's the same, Lauren, in both of those, so I'm confused.
Okay, so the one on the left has been resampled to make the print size bigger. The one on the right was not resampled, so when I changed the resolution, my print size dropped down. See that? So now I'm making, instead of a 24-inch wide print, I'm making a 19-inch wide print. Both of them are
Did they not-
300. Both of them are 300 pixels per inch, but my print size has changed and my pixel dimensions changed when I resampled and went bigger. So if I don't resample, I can't make the print any bigger than what the native resolution will let me make. Okay.
But when you increase the resolution on the smaller pixel size, the height and the width of the print changed. Is that because it cropped it, or it
No,
made it more dense?
that's how. So it's math. It's not cropping anything. So it's taking that 5,092 pixels wide, dividing that by 300, and that comes out to 19.307. But if on the other side, when I resample and I say I want that to be a 24-inch print, it's working the opposite way. It's saying, okay, if you want 24 inches by 300 pixels, it has to be 7,299 pixel wide pixel file. Okay.
Is it
So-
showing you the maximum size print you can do with the data that you put in there?
No. Photoshop, any program will let you make it as big as you want. The problem is you don't know how big to make it, and that is the art of it. So how big it is depends on how much tolerance you have for how the picture is going to look, and it also depends on how far away you're looking at the print. So if you're looking at a print from 3 inches away, you need a hell of a lot higher resolution than if you're looking at it from 300 yards away. So like a billboard you see on the highway, the resolution on that might be 10 pixels per inch, might be 6. I mean, you look at a billboard up close and it's just this glob of crap, but you see it from a big distance, your eye blends everything together. And so everything that is printed, except a continuous tone print photograph, is made up of a series of dots, and your eye blends those dots together. And the closer the dots are together, the more continuous the tones look. So when you're making a print, either your own printer, sending it to a lab, however that print's being made, unless it's off of a inkjet printer, off of any printer other than a silver halide printer, it's made up of dots. And if you got a magnifying glass out and look, you can see the dots in your printer. So the real question comes down to what PPI should be used when you're making your own print. Well, here we go. It depends. Again, it depends on the size of the print you want to make, and it depends on the viewing distance. So most people make the print so you can see it from 3 feet away and it looks good. You know, when you almost any print, when you get right up inches away, it looks pretty, you know, you start seeing stuff. But it comes down to what can you tolerate, and that's the word I like to use, and what can you get away with. So you see an awful lot of labs saying we need to do 300 PPI for prints. The reason they're saying that is as long as they get a file that big, they know that they're going to have a good quality. As MPix showed you, they get away with 100 an awful lot. So last year I bought a 44-inch Canon printer, a high-end printer. And the first thing I did was started printing, doing lower and lower and lower resolution to see what I can get away with. So making a pretty big print, I can get away with, depends on the paper that I'm using or canvas, whatever I'm printing on. I can get away with 100 PPI on some things, 150 on other things, and some things that I need to have 200 PPI. It depends on the print surface. So it all comes down to testing, trying it, see what works best for the printer you're using. If you're sending it off to a lab, they have their minimums because they don't want to send you a print that doesn't look good. You know, they don't want you to have bad looking prints. So they'll say, no, we're not going below this number. as you can see, MPIX will go down to 100, which is pretty surprising.
Lauren, what do you mean by you get away with?
By get away with, so just like the chart with MPIX, they have the optimal number, which is essentially the native resolution. So the optimally, whew, most of the time you'd love to have everything printed at 300 PPI because you know you're going to get good quality. Sometimes you can get away with printing it at 150 and still get quality that is good enough. So it's what is good enough for you. Good enough for me might be different than good enough for you because I'm selling my pictures to people who are paying a lot of money and they're going to hang on the wall and they better look really, really damn nice. So I need, what I can get away with might be not as low as what you could get away with, depending what you're doing with your photos. I mean, if you're, like I say, if I'm hanging a photo in my barn and nobody's getting within 10 feet of it ever, I don't have a barn. If I had a barn and I was hanging my photos in it and I wasn't getting within 10 feet of it, I can get away with probably printing at 100 PPI and nobody would ever say, ooh, that's starting to fall apart. When they got up close, they say, ooh, I'm starting to see some pixels in there and I'm seeing some fuzziness, but you're far enough back, it doesn't matter.
Lauren, do you manipulate your PPI in Lightroom or Photoshop or both or neither?
Yes, we'll get to that in a minute. We'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
Does what you're getting away with translate into the amount of ink that you're using?
No. That's a function of your printer. How much ink it's laying down. No.
Okay.
Hey, Lauren.
Yes.
On the previous example, everything being equal, is it better to upsize or is it better to lower your PPI?
Yes. Is it better to upsize? It's, whew. There are people who tell you never to upsize. Okay. And there are people who tell you never lower your PPI. It just totally depends on the printer and the surface you're using and what kind of printer it is and what it does.
So if I'm sending it to a lab and I sort of like I'm set on the size and I'm close, lowering the PPI would be better than upsizing it.
Well, we'll talk later about what size you should send to labs, but it's send them all you got is what it really comes down to. Send them all you got and they'll deal with it. Okay, they'll deal with it. We'll talk about that more in a couple of minutes. Yeah, we'll talk about that more in a couple of minutes. Okay. So there's still a couple more things that throw in some questions. So you might have bought a printer and it says it's printing at 4,800 DPI. Does your file need to be 4,800 DPI? Oh God, no. That would be just a monstrous file. If you're making a 8x10, it would be just monstrous file. The reason your printer is saying it's printing at 4,800 DPI is because it needs to make, it is printing ink drops that are much, much, much smaller than a pixel. So it is squeezing lots of little ink drops into the bounds that are pixel to make that continuous tone looking photo. If it printed them as the pixels, when you looked at the print, you'd actually see the dots of ink. So it might be squeezing, well, it is squeezing 400 or 4,800. So DPI is dots per inch, which is what a printer actually does, essentially the same as pixels per inch. So it is actually squeezing 4,800 dots of ink within that inch to make that print feel like it's a continuous tone photo rather than, if you remember the old dot matrix printers that you could see every beep, 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 beep dot. So That is why they say they're at 4800, and their resolution usually is 4800 wide on a row across, and it might be different going down. But when you look at the photo, when you look at the print, you can't see the dots. And you know, if you could, then you're in bad shape. So that's why your printer will say, yeah, it's 4800 DPI. And you're like, oh my God, I need to make my file size 4800 DPI. Well, if you just had a 1-inch print, that'd be, a 1x1 would be just a huge file. So don't get confused by the printer saying it needs 4800 DPI. It doesn't need that. That's what it's outputting at. That's not what it needs for input. Okay. So we asked, do I need to resize my file before I send it to a print lab? Answer is no. Nope. Whoops. Nope. Back up. Sorry. Lead foot. Let me go back. Sorry. There we go. So no. Send them the full file size. Send them everything you got. They'll downsize it if they need to. They won't have somebody sitting there and downsizing it. The printer will do that. The actual printing machine will do that. Same way if you're printing your own photos. You don't need to downsize it before you send it off. But if they ask, send it to whatever they ask. So if they're asking for a 1024 by 768 at 72 pixels per inch, send it to them. They don't need it that way. They just don't understand. And I have gotten into discussions with people who ought to know better, and I'll send them a file and it's got plenty of pixels. And they'll say, but it's not 300 pixels per inch. And I will say, okay, I'm not going to get into this with you. So I will send you a file that says it's 300 pixels per inch, but it'll be the exact same pixel dimensions. So as long as you have the pixel dimensions that are, when you do the math by that, they're fine. But if they ask, if they're not educated, which sounds a little rough, but it's the truth, I don't try to educate them anymore. I just re-export it out of Lightroom and say, here it is. Okay, and we'll talk about how in a minute. So, the question always comes up, how do I know the file's dimensions if I don't open it in Lightroom? Well, if you just right-click on a photo in Windows, you can right-click on the image file on your desktop and select properties. It'll pop up. This is a Mac. Again, if you right-click and click on Get Info, it will show you the dimensions right there, 866 by 792. So if you just want to know what your dimensions are, right there, it'll tell you. If you're using Lightroom, it's always there in the metadata. So in this one, you can see that the original dimensions are the 8688 by 75792, but I cropped this photo. So my cropped dimensions are a lot smaller. So it's 7511 by 3756. So when you crop, what you're doing is you're cutting off pixels and you're throwing the pixels away. You're dumping them. You're throwing them in the trash can. So you have to be careful when you crop a photo, how much you're cropping it, how much you're throwing away, and which depends on how big you're going to print it. So, I'm always keeping an eye on after I've cropped it. Hopefully when I'm cropping, I'm only cropping one direction, either the width or the height. If I have to come in on both, that's when you're really throwing things away. If you shoot a normal 2x3 and you crop the top off, and you're making a 11-inch print, you crop the top, that doesn't matter. You're just making a shorter print. You're not losing pixels, pixel resolution. So,
Lauren, can I ask the question?
Yep.
It's Mike. So the photo that is in back of me right now, I recently printed it on a canvas, and they wanted a file that was no bigger than 20 megabytes, and it was 20. I don't know, it was higher as the JPEG that I sent out of Lightroom. So what I did is I reduced the long dimension until it was 18 or 19 megabytes and sent it to them. Is that what you just said? Is that the right way to do that?
I'd find another lab, but
Yeah, but is that the right way to reduce it?
So they didn't
Or
give
am I
you
dealing
the,
with a okay,
they
go
didn't
ahead.
give you the dimensions. They said they wanted a file size.
Yeah,
Wow. So the problem with the file size is, remember way back when we started, a JPEG file size is a hell of a lot smaller than a TIFF file size. You know, there's many other factors in a file size other than the pixel dimensions.
okay, so stick to dimensions.
Stick to
is what you're
dimensions
saying.
because file
Okay.
size has so many other factors in it that don't relate to what the pixel dimensions are.
Based on what you said, I got it now. Okay, thanks.
So if like a 32-bit file is much bigger than a 16-bit file, but the pixel dimensions would be the same. It's just how many colors each pixel can display.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Lauren, I think my question is a math question, and I suck at math. So
Me too.
if I have a photo that I crop for the best composition to my eye,
Yes.
and I want to print it in a certain size, it may not be an 8x10 or a 12x18. So
Right.
I'm not even sure how to ask my question. I mean, is there a way I can keep my composition but still make it whatever size I want?
Yes, that problem is just how big is the piece of paper. And the real problem with that is, can I find a frame to fit it? So if you take a normal picture and you cropped it in half, say, you're not going to go to Michael's and find a frame that fits that size. So you'd have to get a custom mat and a custom frame built. But you could print that on any size paper, whatever size paper you're going to print the full frame, and it'll just waste half the paper. So that doesn't hurt a thing as far as resolution and pixel dimensions.
Okay, thanks. So the issue is that I have to go to the expense of a custom frame then. Okay, thank you.
Right. Because if you cropped a normal picture in half, it's not going to fit in the aspect ratio of an 8x10 because it's a different shape. It's like putting a round peg in a square hole. You know.
Okay, thank you.
It just doesn't. It's not, the aspect ratios aren't the same and doesn't fit. So you end up wasting paper, which isn't bad, but unless you're a waste.
Well,
So,
I have a question. Does the same photo in RAW and JPEG, do they have the same PPI?
yes,
Okay.
yes. It's just that the JPEG has been compressed, and what compression does is, say you had, well, like the top of this slide, it starts, the row that says resolution. It starts, if you think of the row, from the left to you get to the R is all black. So what compression does is say, hey, wait, from there to there is all black, so we can just remember that that's all black, and puts that away into its calculation. And then, oh, you got some white, so we'll do white for a little while, then we're back to black. And so when you save the file, it remembers all that stuff. When you open it back up, it says, oh yeah, remember that was all black from there to there, and pops it back in. Hopefully. So the more you compress, the lower the quality of your JPEG, the more it throws away and tries to rebuild when it reopens the file. Okay. So
when you send a photo to a lab, you're sending it as a JPEG, I guess. And then when they open it, they're getting this compressed version. Right? So how do they get back to the better quality?
Oh, the power of computers. It will never be the same quality as the raw file, but JPEG now is refined enough that especially if you put your JPEG quality all the way to 100, you're probably not going to see any difference in the file when it's after it's printed. The MPix Pro, which again is a Pro Lab, only takes JPEG files. They don't take TIFFs. They don't take anything. So a lot of labs prefer to have a TIFF file, which is not a compressed file, but it's huge. It's a huge file. So uploading and transmitting and everything, storage, everything takes a lot more time, space, and everything. MPix says, we only want JPEGs, but make your quality 100%. So the compression is the least possible, but when it uncompresses, the quality is there that once we print it, you're probably not going to see any difference. If you're making a 90-inch print, maybe you will, maybe you won't. I have 72-inch prints hanging on my wall that I've sent to labs as JPEGs, and can't tell any difference.
Thank you.
There'll be people that argue that point, but you know, it all comes down to, can you see any difference after it's printed? Yeah, can't. What's the difference, right? So you'll notice that here in Lightroom, it's not even mentioning resolution. It's only talking about the pixel dimensions. So as a photo sits in Lightroom, you can't change the resolution as it sits there. But when you export it, then it gives you an option to set the resolution. And the reality is, the only reason they put that there is so you don't have to have that argument with people who don't understand it. Because if you output a picture at, like this one at 1200 pixels wide, and you set the resolution at 100 and export it, and then you change the resolution to 1000 and export it, you look at the file, at both of those files that it exported, they're the same size. Because it's working off of pixel dimensions, not resolution. The reason they put this in here is if you open those two files in Photoshop, one will open as the 1000 pixels per inch, and the photo itself will look a little smaller versus the one that's 100. So when you send it to somebody who doesn't understand, they'll open it and say, oh, yeah, it's 100 pixels per inch, or it's 1000 pixels per inch. 1000 you'd never do. But if it's 300, we need it at 300. Well, if I'm sending it to them, I'm going to, you know, if they say we need a 1200 pixel wide image at 300 pixels per inch, doesn't matter what resolution I set this on. It's going to send them the same size file. But if they open it in Photoshop, Photoshop would look at it, would rearrange the pixels in a different way. Both of them would be exactly the same way, but it would tell them one of them is 300 pixels per inch, one of them is 100 pixels per inch. And the people who don't quite understand it wouldn't freak out saying, oh, it's only 100 pixels per inch. No, the pixels are all there. Doesn't matter. So Lightroom put in the resolution to keep people from freaking out, basically, is the only reason I can figure out. They didn't tell me that, but if you do that test, it outputs the exact same thing no matter what size you put there. So you can put 1 or you can put 1000, it's going to be the same. So what it really comes down to is pixel dimensions are all you really need to know. It's all you really need to know. If you're making your own prints and the printer is going to handle any conversions for you. If you're sending it to a lab, if they know what they're doing, all they want is they want the biggest file you can send them. They'll downsample it if they need to. They'll upsample it if they need to. So if they need to upsample it, hopefully they're using a good program. There's several programs that'll upsample a file for you, and the printers will upsample. So you know, if I do the math on my, you know, I print 40 by 60 prints all the time. If I do the math, you know, I need about I forget what it is. I should have calculated that before. 40 by 60, 240. I need about you know, if I was doing it at 300 pixels per inch, I'd probably need a 120 gigabyte file, you know. My camera don't kick that out. It kicks out a 50. So it's upsampling it, but it does it in a way that beautiful prints, just beautiful prints. So really comes down to all you really need to know is what your pixel dimensions are. And that's really easy to find. And if you're exporting out of Photoshop or Lightroom or anything else, and you're sending it to a lab or you're sending it to your own printer, you don't need to worry about it. Just make sure you have enough. You want to have enough.
Should you be sending as a TIFF or a JPEG? And it seems that you can get more raw data in the TIFF than the JPEG.
No, you're getting a bigger file because it's not compressed. That's the only difference. You're getting the same number of pixels from one side of the image to the other, but they're compressing it for JPEG and they're not compressing it for TIFF. So that's what's changing the file size. It's not the number of pixels. And the number of pixels are what matters.
So Lauren, what will be a good size up to for taking a picture from an iPhone? What can be the maximum you recommend?
It depends on the iPhone. I mean, so again, it's a matter of pixels dimensions, and it will tell you, and again, it's a viewing distance. You'll see billboards shot on iPhones. And so Apple says, hey, look, you can make a billboard with an iPhone. Stand up close to that billboard and see what it looks like. It looks pretty bad, but as you're driving down the road, it looks pretty good. So again, it's a matter of how big can you get away with and it still looks good.
How about a 16 by 20? I was trying to make a canvas print from an iPhone thing, and the website said it won't work.
Yeah, they're probably right, because that might be down in the 50 pixel per inch range.
Hey, Lauren.
Yes.
Lauren. Just out of curiosity, if you're trying to increase your pixels, that means you need what? A better camera?
Yep.
Okay, so your pixel dimensions are really controlled by your camera.
Exactly.
Okay.
So
thanks.
As soon as Canon came out with a 52 megabyte camera, that's what I started shooting with, because I make big prints. If I wasn't making big prints, I wouldn't need that big of a file size, coming out of the camera.
So how many pixels, how big a print does the Mark V, the Mark IV, the 5D Mark IV?
Well, I can show you a 90-inch print that I shot with the Mark II.
Okay.
So it's all relative to, whatever.
Yeah.
So before we take any more questions, let me just point out a couple of things. I got some upcoming workshops I wanted to point out. Saturday, doing a Photoshop for photographers workshop. These are all online, of course. So that's from 1 to 4. Learning Lightroom starts on Monday. It's a 3-session for 2 hours each session. Monday, Wednesday, Friday of next week during the day. And then a Lightroom, the next level. So if you're familiar with Lightroom, this one's digging in a little bit deeper. That's Saturday, May 2, from 1 to 5. And all these are on my website, laurenphotos.com. So what other questions do we have out there?
Lauren, could you go back to 2 slides where you had the Lightroom dialog box open? Yeah, could you kind of walk through some of these settings? For example, the quality. What does that do? I've read different things. Some people say you can go down 80 to 80 on that. Some say you should always go to 100. Never quite sure where to set that.
So if you're depends what you're doing with it. If you're putting it on Facebook, you might be able to get away with 80 because they're going to recompress it anyway. I find that most things between 90 and 95 give me a smaller file size and high quality. If I was sending it to a lab to make a print, I would crank that all the way to 100. If I'm putting it on the web, 90 to 95 will give you real good quality and will reduce the file size, probably enough for anything you need to do.
A program like Genuine Practical, what does that do?
Whoever was breaking up, I couldn't hear that.
Genuine fractals for resizing an image?
Yeah, all they're doing is they've figured out a way to add more pixels. So they're guessing what color that pixel should be between the two pixels beside it. And that's all it's doing. And some programs do a better job of that than others. But what they're doing is adding pixels, guessing what color that pixel should be.
Lauren, for color space, do you always for print pick sRGB, or are there other options?
There are other options, and that depends on the lab. So sRGB, so this comes down to color gamut, which is a whole nother thing. And I do have a video on my website about printing, and I go into color gamut and the whole printing, I don't want to say fiasco, but fiasco. So color space, sRGB, all web browsers can see all the colors that it has. Pro RGB, you might lose some colors when you try to put it on a website. Adobe RGB is even better. So that depends on the lab. So color space is what it is how many colors can that file type, that color space display. And some show more than others. So you want the one that can show the most. And the one that shows the least, sRGB. And that's why it's the standard for the web. So again, MPix Pro wants everything to be sRGB. So they say that's good enough. So, and they do a lot.
So sRGB is good enough for print, or you would recommend something else?
I would recommend something else, but it depends on the lab and what they're doing. So some of them don't want to deal with anything other than sRGB. Some of them do. So you need to either call them or see on their website what color space they recommend.
Lauren, is that for all size prints?
Yes. Well, the smaller the print, the lower the quality can be, and you can't tell. So if you're making a 4x6 print and you're giving them a full file size, sRGB is going to be plenty fine. The problem happens the more you enlarge a print, then the more that any little quality issue arises.
Lauren, on the previous slide, you had the metadata. How do you pull that up in Lightroom? That comprehensive view.
So that is on the right side in the library view. It's always there under. Does it say metadata? I'm blanking a little bit, but it's always there on the right. You might have to scroll down a little bit, but once you click on a photo, that is right there.
Yes, you're right, Lauren. It's labeled metadata.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Lauren,
Lauren.
Go ahead.
Lauren, in Lightroom, I think you do have to pick what is shown on that right-hand panel. So if you don't have the default, you might not get all the metadata you want.
Yeah, there is a tab that says default metadata, and so this is in the default.
Hey, Lauren, John Hawkins with a question.
Hi, John.
Back in February, you did the indoor workshop series, and you asked us to send you copies of some of our work. And you said if you feel comfortable resizing it, could you go through that a bit in Lightroom again?
Yes. So if somebody says I want a file that's 1200 pixels wide, you just click on resize to fit, select long edge, type in 1200, doesn't matter what the resolution is, and that will do it. But if you're sending it out to a lab and you want to give them everything you got, you don't check that resize to fit box, and it'll export all the pixels you got. It won't resize it. It won't resample it at all.
Okay, so the file I sent to you, I should have clicked the resize to fit box.
Yes. Yes.
Lauren, I have a question.
Okay.
I was trying to print 8.5 by 11, and I guess my question is, did I recrop it too small because it only prints my, I don't know, I guess it's the computer. It will only accept an 8 by 10.
So you cropped it to 11 by 14 aspect ratio. So is that right?
I actually did what the other day, I cropped it to the composition that I liked, and then I wanted to print on 8.5 by 11, but it would only print 8 by 10. Even if I changed to put it to 8.5 by 11, it wouldn't.
Go watch my printing video.
Okay.
There's several possibilities that could be, and it could take 10 minutes to go through them.
Okay.
But sorry, but page setup and file setup, and it could be several things.
Okay.
So Lauren, just quickly, the workflow that you would go first, you would go to crop and ratios and then image size?
So I crop my photos to the way, one of two things, either the way they should look best if I'm putting them on the web, or if I'm printing, I make them fit to either a normal 2:3 aspect ratio or a 2:1 or a 3:1, because that's what size frames I have, and I don't want to make custom frames. So I make my pictures that I'm printing and selling fit to those sizes. So I do that in Lightroom. And then until I'm ready to print them, I don't do anything to them. When I'm ready to print, then I set up my paper size, my output size, my page size, and all that to whatever size paper I'm making to whatever size print I'm making.
Got it.
So I'm not exporting a photo out of Lightroom until I know what I'm doing with it. And at that point, I don't have to worry about the resolution, because Lightroom talking to my printer is always going to take care of that. And somebody has a question online or in the chat about what color space you'd use if you're printing to your own printer. It's not a factor because you're not exporting. So when you hit print, it doesn't ask you what color space it is. It knows. So when you're printing directly out of Lightroom or Photoshop, you don't have to worry about a lot of these options. The computer and the printer will talk to each other and figure that out for you and do all the math. So you don't have to resize. Again, if you're printing out of Lightroom, it never even asks you what resolution you want.
I see. Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions? So there's a question online. Any way that Facebook files the right size that does not to be sampled by Facebook or WhatsApp? Nope, they're jerks. they recompress everything. Doesn't matter if it's the exact right size or not, because they want it to be small. So.
Lauren, I have a question. I came in late, so I missed probably the first 25 minutes or so. Can I see this on a recording?
Yes, I will. I will post the video on my website and on also the meetup group in the discussion area.
Good, thank you.
Probably tomorrow. I might get it done today, but tomorrow for sure.
Great, thanks.
Sure.
If you want to put a picture up on the internet and you don't want anybody to be able to print it, what would you do?
Make it the exact size that so like I said, my blog, the maximum size I can display is 910 pixels. So I never output a file size bigger than 910 pixels. You can still make a pretty decent 2x3 inch print off of that, or maybe a 4x6, but you can't get any bigger. It'll really fall apart. So when you send a photo to anything, you want to resize it. So the maximum pixel size is whatever this maximum is that's going to show up on the screen.
So the pixel is more important than the resolution if you're putting it up on, say, Facebook or something?
On Facebook, resolution is not a factor at all. Remember, all you need to know are pixel dimensions. Resolution's not a factor.
So 1600 along the long side, that's 72. Would that be printable?
1600 at 72, yeah, some size. I mean, if you printed it at 100, you could do a 1600 divided by 100 is 10. So you could do a 10-inch print. Or is that one? I'm losing 2 zeros. 1.6-inch print without upsampling. If you upsample, you pretty easily get a 3-inch or a 4-inch print out of that. So again, remember, if you're in Lightroom and you output this file at 1200 pixels and you do it, set the resolution at 100, and you output it again and set the resolution at 300, and you look at those two files that you exported, they're going to be exactly the same size. That's why resolution doesn't matter. Do the test. If you don't believe me, do the test. Because it doesn't make sense, but it's math. It's the truth.
So Lauren, how do you find out what the minimum pixel to display and where you're sending it?
So it depends where you're sending them. I mean, most places will tell you, but if you're on a Mac and you do a screenshot and you do Command-Shift-4 and you click and drag across, it'll show you the pixels as you're doing as you click and drag your mouse. It will tell you that. If you I haven't worked on Windows for a few years now, so I don't know if you can do a screenshot of exactly the photo, and it's the biggest photo they have on the web page. It'll tell you what the dimensions are when you save it. Just right click and save the picture, and then you can see what it is.
All right,
the easiest way is just to do a screenshot and drag across. There are apps that you can put on your screen that'll show you do an overlay to show you the pixels that programmers use. But easiest way is just click and drag.
Well, Lauren,
yep.
I wanted to make sure I've got this straight. Let's say I'm bringing a print to Lauren's master prints. Yes. I would basically in Lightroom look up the longest dimension pixels for, let's say I have a 2000 by 3000 pixel image. Yep. And then when I output it on Lightroom, I would uncheck resize to fit, do long edge, and then 3000.
No, you just, when you uncheck resize to fit, the long edge disappears. You don't have any choices. So you're just outputting the biggest file size that it naturally would create.
Boy, that makes it easy.
Yes.
Hey, Lauren, John Hawkins again.
Yes.
Hey, this is not an advertisement for a Lauren photo, but I'm telling you, based on what I heard today, if I need credit, I'm sending it to you.
Great. So I do master printing. On my website is a tab for master prints, and they're quality prints, which means they're not the cheapest, but I work on each one. If you want me to, I'll enhance it, but I'll make sure that the print's looking good. And if you're doing big prints, we do a test print first, so you don't have to buy a big print. We'll just print 3 or 4 inches wide, whatever width you have, and see how that looks, and then go from there. So thank you, John. Thanks for the plug. But right now the master print shop is shut down, of course. But hopefully we're back running soon.
Lauren, where can we find your video on printing?
On laurenphotos.com. Any inside page on the right side, there's a list of videos that I have done recently. And so one of them says printing or something incredibly smart like that.
Thanks a lot.
So,
Printing your
Lauren,
photos.
real quick, the pixels, is the megapixels on your camera is what we're looking for?
Yes, which is a little bit deceiving too, but essentially.
And just out of curiosity, can you give, like, if we had a Nikon, what would we be looking for?
Well, most of them are in the 20 to 25 megapixel range. So that means if you divide, if one side is 25,000 pixels, the other side is 10,000. So you're making me do math off the top of my head. That's always dangerous, but you know, the reality is most cameras you buy now, you can make a very high quality print up to easily 40 inches. If you have a 10-year-old camera, maybe not, but you can make a pretty darn high quality print, maybe bigger than that, but you know, no problem.
That given that we don't crop our images, correct?
Exactly. Yeah, if you crop that baby in half, then you can only make the print half as big, right? If you crop half the photo out, you're throwing away half your half of your pixels in your.
Right.
Yep.
What do you think about the in-camera setting the ratios? Like, you know, there is 24 by 36, 1:1. Would that help?
No.
Just
so all that's doing.
In camera?
No. So you've got your sensor is however big, right? And
right.
if you change that, all you're doing is telling it to crop off some of that, and you're throwing away pixels before you get it out of the camera. So you're much better throwing them away later than throwing them away before, because if you ever want them back, you can't get them. So
I see.
Full file size, always. If you're shooting JPEGs, the largest file size you can get. If you're shooting RAW, the largest RAW file, always.
Got it. Makes sense.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Thank you. Looking forward to April 18th. I signed up this morning.
Great. Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Nothing else, anybody?
Thank you so much for today.
Thank you very much. Be safe out there.
You too.
Thank you.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you.